Welcome to the program, everybody from the edge of America. I'm Rick Amato. Last week I said that you've hit a new low when former U.S. President Jimmy Carter criticizes your work, as Carter did of President Obama and the president's handling of ISIS. Sadly, though, the news just keeps getting worse for President Obama. Airstrikes are not having the decimating effect President Obama and his advisors told us that they would. ISIS fighters appear to be emboldened and are on the attack in Syria, Turkey, and now on Baghdad's doorstep, as Iraqi forces are being overrun. So now what? Will President Obama send U.S. troops on the ground in the Middle East? Should he send U.S. troops on the ground in the Middle East? And what about moderate Muslims? What role, if any, can they play in the fight against ISIS? Joining me at this time via Skype from Phoenix, Arizona, is former U.S. naval officer, devout Muslim, and the president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. Dr. Jasser, welcome to the show.
It's great to be with you, Rick. Thanks for having me back on.
All right, Dr. Jasser, right away, you have an important message for President Obama that you are angry about, something that he's been saying, and you want to get that message out to him. We're on the air across America. We're seen in Washington, D.C. What would you like the American people to know that you want to say to President Obama?
Well, I think it's important that, for those of us, if you want Muslims that are moderate to have a seat at the table, you can't deny that there is a form of Islam, which is the Islamic State, or ISIS, which is the Islam of the Islamic Republic of Iran, or the Islamic radicals of the Saudi Arabian government that have beheaded over 20 people in the last 2 months, or the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. So my point is when he says they're not Islamic and sort of is trying to, maybe he's well-intended or maybe he's being influenced by Muslim Brotherhood folks that don't want America to wake up to the threat of political Islam. When he tells us it's not Islamic, he's actually marginalizing the very people that he needs to counter radicalization, to bring us to the table that Islam needs reform and that our form of Islam is not the same as the Islam of ISIS. You can't deny that it's a form of Islam, which is what he's trying to do.
It's an important message. I hadn't thought of it the way you just put it, Dr. Jasser. He is marginalizing moderate Muslims.
He really is. And it's interesting, in the speech to the UN last week, he cited a so-called moderate imam, bin Bayah, who we've written quite a bit on, who the White House met with last year. We released a press release, and this is a guy who said, yes, he's against al-Qaeda and he's against radicals, but his ideology, he promoted slavery in Mauritania. He actually is part of a Sharia court in which he called for the killing of Americans and Israelis as quote-unquote legitimate targets because of occupation. So this is not a moderate. So when you look at who are the moderate Muslims, it's those of us who are not only against the Islamic State of ISIS, but against all Islamic states and believe that we're against Islamism as an ideology. So the problem right now, when the narrative about radical Islam is simply that it's the violence, and he kept talking about violent extremism, that's not the problem. That's just a disagreement about the means to get to the ends, which is the Islamic State. And those of us who are Americans that believe in liberty and Western modernity are against any form of Islamic State because it's basically theocracy any way you want to describe it.
What about Sharia law? Those of us who are watching this who are not of Muslim faith look at Sharia law and see it as something that is radical.
Well, I think this is where the battle is, why my book is called A Battle for the Soul of Islam, because Sharia right now is the primary instrument of radicalization of these governments like the Islamic Republic of Pakistan that has laws against blasphemy and apostasy. We see the Nobel Peace Prize just given to Malala. Why? Because she wanted to get an education, and she was shot going to school, and she was defying Sharia interpretations in Pakistan. The Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt that won an election was putting into place Sharia law. Now, we can't say all Sharia is bad because I, as a Muslim, my wife and I, our wedding documents are based on our interpretations of Sharia, or God's law. There are Sharia that we use for diet, for dietary rules, for prayer rules, personal pietistic Sharia. But Sharia in government, or theocracy, needs to go the way the American Revolution went, in which the church and its canonic law were marginalized from government.
When, I've been on the record, Dr. Jasser, as saying that the U.S. in its fight against ISIS should not isolate itself to to fighting ISIS fighters. This is not just about fighting a group here, a group there. It is fighting against the ideology of Sharia law. The ideology of Sharia law as you say, trying to create an Islamic State. Do you agree or disagree with that statement that I make?
You're 100% right, because if we miss the target here and we just say, well, it's just another counterterrorism operation, we're going to continue the same insanity that we've been doing since 9/11, which is a whack-a-mole program where we go from Pakistan to Afghanistan to Syria to Egypt back to the United States with Fort Hood and Boston. These are all related, and it's about the supremacy of Sharia law and government or Islamist movements. And unless we engage and say, you know, the new Cold War of the 21st century, just like the Soviets, we were fighting against communism and their supremacist mindset, unless we engage that and engage the Muslims on the ground that want to fight against Islamism, which, by the way, most Muslims, I believe, don't want. The Brotherhood in Egypt was ousted after 1 year.
Right.
Yes, the Islamists won an election, but they were ousted by 5 times more Muslims in the streets than wanted to oust Mubarak. So if you want to engage those Muslims, we can't go around saying that the Saudis are our allies and the Pakistani governments are allies. We have to say that, you know what, we have a third path for the Middle East, not the old monarchies and dictators or the other side of the coin, which are the radical Islamists, and that there's a third path for liberty. That's the opportunity of the Arab awakening.
You're a former U.S. naval officer. That, for viewers who may be seeing you for the first time, of course, you're a frequent guest on national TV, but those who may not be familiar with you, they may be surprised to hear someone of a Muslim faith, as well as being a U.S. naval officer, a proud patriot of America. Anything you'd like to comment on that?
Well, I think this is, you know, when my family, I grew up in Wisconsin, and my book talks about my personal narrative in the battle for the soul of Islam. And we formed our organization knowing that the laboratory of freedom in America is a unique laboratory, even more poignant in this battle than Europe, where there's very much of a sentiment of anti-religious sentiment, versus in America, it's a very pro-religious society that separates church and state, if you will, in the Establishment Clause. And that is the nucleus that can treat this disease that we have within the House of Islam globally in 56 majority Muslim countries that are dominated by an Islamist supremacism. And I think Muslims are getting a pass in America. Why? Because we're not as motivated as the Egyptian Muslims are, that found themselves under the boots of theocracy with the Brotherhood and Mubarak before them. So right. In America, we can't continue to give Muslims a pass. Now, we can't alienate all of Islam because we're the ones that are going to solve the theological dilemma. But on the other hand, if we have too much political correctness, the education that our families had living in this country about the way liberty should work is not going to have the facility it can to bring about reform globally.
All right. So you are the president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, but there is also another project out there called the Muslim Liberty Project. Tell us about that, please.
Well, if you look at many of these Muslims serving in ISIS, and they get pulled of what we call Islamo-patriotism and the sort of this pull of jihad. We formed this project 4 or 5 years ago, and now it has some chapters on campuses, including Arizona, West Point, and elsewhere, in which we say, you know, the identification with a nationalism like America, in which Muslims feel that not only are they Muslim, but their primary identification is with their country, America, that gives them the freedom to accept or reject any tenet of their faith, to become Muslim, leave Islam, that is the purest form of a faith. That identification of American patriotism is the way to inoculate Muslims against the radicalization that pulls them into Islamo-patriotism. And we've found that that's the only solution to radicalization. Unfortunately, we're not getting the support for these programs that, if you look at the State Department, DHS, and others, all their programs about combating violent extremism, which is really working with the wrong people that just want to use a nonviolent ends to create the caliphate and other things. And our Liberty Project is about, we abandon the caliphate. We refuse to accept any Islamic state because we want to accept the greatest country on earth, which is America, and our secular liberal democracy.
Final question. I assume you've reached out to the White House. I assume you've reached out to various government agencies, perhaps members of Congress, with with your philosophy under the Muslim Liberty Project, and you say that that's not the strategy they want to pursue. What sort of reaction do you get from White House officials or U.S. government officials, whomever you're speaking with, when you talk about let's reach out and have U.S. Muslims embrace being American?
We get crickets. Crickets, Rick. Nothing. They don't want to talk to us. And it's not only my organization. We had a coalition of over 20 groups, the American Islamic Leadership Coalition, that included the American Islamic Congress, the Muslim Canadian Congress, Lib for All, and other organizations, in which we sent the White House a letter, an open letter in 2012, where we said, your 20-page counterterrorism document from the White House used the word ideology 24 times, and yet never named it, never said Islamism, never said jihad or Salafism or Wahhabism. You can't defeat that enemy. You just can't. And yet we are ready to help you, and you don't want to engage us. You're engaging the wrong Muslims. And recently, a Freedom of Information Act report revealed that emails within the Homeland Security identified me as part of the solution, and yet said the reason we can't work with the Zuhdi Jassers of this world, in the email, a Homeland Security agent within the Bureau said it's because he's too pro-military and he'll get labeled as being part of a conspiracy apparatus, which tells you that they're already accepting the radical dogma, which is anti-American, as somehow being commonplace for Muslims, when in fact most Muslims I know don't want to be. CARE and the Islamic Society of North America and others have a reception rate of only 12% of Muslims by a Pew and Abu Dhabi poll. So I can tell you that 88% of Muslims are non-engaged, and the government doesn't want to use those of us who are ready to develop programs to engage real moderate Muslims.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, former U.S. naval officer, devout Muslim, thank you for joining us for an eye-opening and important conversation. So who will be our Mama Luke of the day? Plus another American Ebola victim? Another excuse for tea time on the golf course? Stay tuned. Next is our political debate du jour. You're watching the Rick Amato Show on One American News.